New escalating entitled updates. Am I the bad guy for asking my neighbor to wait for her laundry at her house? I recently found myself in a rather amusing situation with my neighbor, and I thought I'd share the whole story with you. It all started one day when I picked up my son from school. As we were walking up the driveway, my neighbor flagged me down. She explained that her washing machine was broken and asked if she could use mine. Being the good neighbor that I am, I agreed without a second thought. While she was gathering her laundry, I took the opportunity to whip up some grilled cheese sandwiches for my son and me. When she returned, I showed her where the laundry machine was, and after loading it up, she came into the kitchen. To my surprise, she asked if she could have one of my grilled cheese sandwiches. Now, I'm all for sharing, but I had only made 2 sandwiches. I thought it was a bit odd to ask for food when she was there for laundry, not lunch. My son, being the generous little guy he is, offered her half of his sandwich. I had added an egg to the grilled cheese, which I guess she didn't expect. After taking a bite, she looked quite grossed out and asked where my trash can was. My son, ever the food advocate, exclaimed, "Don't waste food," so she just handed the sandwich back to him. I quickly swapped halves with him and discreetly tossed her half in the bin when he wasn't looking. Then she asked to use my bathroom, which I naturally allowed. After that, she returned to the kitchen and asked if I had any refreshments. I had to tell her no, and suggested that she might want to wait for her laundry to finish at home. She seemed taken aback and asked if I was trying to get rid of her. I explained that we needed to focus on homework, but she insisted she didn't mind. I felt a bit awkward, so I reiterated that we needed to keep distractions to a minimum. She responded with, "Well, I know when I'm not wanted," and left looking rather annoyed. I felt a mix of guilt and annoyance. Who acts like that? I couldn't help but wonder if I had been too harsh. The next day, my neighbor returned, and I was a little flustered by the whole situation. She waved me down again, and I hesitated, thinking, what now? She approached with a pie, saying it was a thank you gift for using my washing machine. I graciously accepted, even though I felt she didn't need to bring anything. Then came the twist. She suggested we go inside and try a piece of pie together. I glanced at the clock and realized it was almost my son's nap time. I thought quickly and suggested that she invite her husband over too, hoping that would deter her. To my surprise, she got excited about the idea and said, "Great, I'll go get him." At that moment, I felt like I was in a sitcom. My son and I went inside, and I started cutting the pie, feeling like a victim of fate. Before I knew it, her husband arrived, and I could see he looked exasperated and embarrassed. We sat down to eat pie, and throughout the visit, she asked me a series of odd questions, while her husband looked increasingly annoyed. It was like watching a comedy unfold right in front of me. After we finished the pie, she asked if I had coffee. Her husband, clearly wanting to leave, gently reminded her that I was trying to put my son down for a nap. She insisted that I didn't mind, but he firmly said, he minds, while guiding her out the door. I couldn't help but admire his patience. In the end, I realized that my neighbor isn't trying to be creepy or intrusive. She's just a bit bored. It was a strange experience, but it helped me feel more at ease about her. So, to everyone who thought she might have ulterior motives, rest assured, she's just a quirky neighbor looking for a little company. And honestly, I think I might have a new appreciation for her, quirks and all. I never imagined that moving into a new neighborhood would lead to such an unexpected series of events. It all started when I found myself in a rather awkward situation with my neighbor, who seemed to have a peculiar fascination with my life. Initially, it was just a simple request. She needed to do laundry and asked if she could use my washing machine. I agreed, thinking it was a harmless favor. After all, we were neighbors, and it's common courtesy to help each other out. However, things quickly escalated from there. As she waited for her laundry, she began asking me a barrage of personal questions. I'm not one to shy away from sharing a bit about myself, so I answered her inquiries about my life, including my recent divorce and my son. I thought I was just being friendly, but in hindsight, I realize now that I may have shared too much. Her curiosity about my divorce was particularly intense. She wanted to know how long ago it happened, why I moved, and even the details surrounding my custody arrangement. I found her questions intrusive, but I brushed them off, thinking she was just being neighborly. Little did I know this was just the beginning of her boundary issues. As the days passed, I noticed her behavior becoming increasingly odd. She would pop over unannounced, and I began to feel uncomfortable with her frequent visits. I tried to be assertive and let her know that I needed my space, but it seemed to have little effect. Then, things took a turn for the worse. Out of the blue, My ex-wife called me, furious. It turned out that my neighbor had found her on Facebook and messaged her, asking if she was my ex-wife and why our son didn't live with her. I was shocked and appalled. How could someone feel entitled to interfere in my life like this? We weren't even friends. I quickly realized that I had unwittingly provided her with my last name, which she used to track down my ex. I felt like a fool for sharing personal information with someone who clearly had no respect for boundaries. My ex was understandably upset, and I found myself apologizing profusely, but her anger lingered. In the aftermath, I turned to the internet for advice. People suggested documenting everything, and even considering a restraining order. I never thought I would have to take such drastic measures, but the situation was becoming untenable. I decided to install security cameras around my home for added protection. I couldn't help but wonder what my neighbor was thinking. Did she believe that I had somehow kidnapped my own child? Was she trying to play the role of a concerned neighbor? Or was there something more sinister at play? I decided to talk to her husband, who had always seemed reasonable. I hoped he could help me understand her behavior and perhaps put an end to this madness. In the end, I learned a valuable lesson about boundaries and the importance of being cautious with personal information. It's a strange world we live in, and sometimes the people closest to us can surprise us in the most unsettling ways. As I continue to navigate this situation, I remain vigilant, hoping for a resolution that allows me to live peacefully in my own home. I never thought I would find myself in a situation like this, but here I am, sharing my experience about an escalating issue with my neighbor. It all started innocently enough, but soon spiraled into something that felt downright bizarre. It began when I noticed my neighbor acting a bit strangely. She seemed overly interested in my life, which was unsettling. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe she was just friendly. However, things took a turn when I received a message from my ex-partner. She had been in contact with my neighbor on social media, and it became clear that my neighbor had been watching us more closely than I realized. After a few uncomfortable encounters, I decided it was time to address the situation. I approached my neighbor's husband when I saw him pull into their driveway. I showed him the screenshots of the messages my ex had sent me, and he seemed annoyed. He promised to talk to her, saying she means well, but also that she watches too much daytime television. I hoped that would be the end of it. But just a day later, while my son and I were enjoying breakfast, there was a knock at the door. I couldn't believe it when I looked through the peephole and saw her standing there, holding a baking tray. I chose to ignore her, explaining to my son that sometimes we're busy with important things and don't have time for visitors unless it's an emergency. She continued to knock for what felt like an eternity, and I could hear her husband calling her name from outside. I didn't want to engage, so I stayed quiet, hoping she would leave. As time went on, her behavior became more erratic. I started feeling paranoid, as if she were watching us whenever we left the house. Just that morning, after being dropped off by friends, I heard another knock on the door shortly after we arrived home. I was convinced it was her again. To protect myself, I ordered a doorbell camera, hoping it would provide some peace of mind. When the camera arrived, I installed it right away. The next day, while I was at work, I received a notification that someone was at my door. Sure enough, it was her again, holding yet another baking tray. Through the app, I told her I was at work and didn't want to talk. She insisted on discussing something important, claiming she was worried about my son and me. Her tone was condescending, and I could feel my frustration boiling over. I finally snapped. I told her to leave my property and made it clear that I didn't want her around me or my son. She tried to argue, but I stopped responding, watching her through the camera app as she continued to insist she just wanted to help. Eventually she left, but the stress of the situation lingered, wondering if she would be waiting for me with yet another baked good or another excuse to invade our space. It was exhausting, and I felt trapped in a situation that had started so innocently. I knew I had to take a stand, but I also worried about what her next move might be. As I navigated this strange and unsettling chapter of my life, I realized that sometimes the most innocuous encounters can lead to unexpected and uncomfortable situations. I just wanted to live my life in peace, but it seemed my neighbor had other plans. Let me take you on a little journey about my life with a neighbor who seems to think my porch is her personal hangout spot. It all started when I noticed that she would casually stroll over to my house, treating my space like it was public property. I mean, who does that? It's infuriating. I get it. She might just be a bored busybody looking for some excitement in her life. But come on, there are plenty of other ways to fill her time. I hear the local animal shelter is always looking for volunteers. So I decided to have a chat with her husband. I thought maybe he could help me out. He assured me he would talk to her, but honestly, I had my doubts. Did he really have that conversation, or was he just trying to brush me off? I didn't want to escalate things by involving the police. After all, she hadn't broken any laws, and I was worried about how that might play out. I mean, I have an ex-wife who would love to know I couldn't handle a little neighborhood drama. One of the most puzzling things about this neighbor was her concern for my son. She seemed to think it was suspicious that he was asleep when we got home. But let's be real, he's 5. Kids fall asleep, especially after a long day. It's not like he was out past curfew. I couldn't wrap my head around her contradictory statements. If it was too late for him to be out, then why was it weird that he was asleep? As I navigated this situation, I found myself explaining to people why I was hesitant to call the police. You see, I'm a black man living in the US, and the dynamics of calling law enforcement can be complicated. I didn't want to risk escalating the situation further or putting myself in a vulnerable position. The last thing I needed was for my neighbor to paint me as the problem when all I wanted was a little peace and quiet. Then, one day I saw her husband again. I was coming home from a playdate with my son and noticed her husband pulling her back inside their house. It was a quick moment, but it gave me hope that he was aware of her antics and maybe even trying to rein her in. My ex-wife, on the other hand, was not interested in hearing from me. She had moved on and I respected that. I didn't want to complicate things for her, especially since she had a new partner and a baby on the way. As the days went by, I noticed my neighbor was becoming increasingly persistent. She knocked on my door and rang the doorbell, claiming she just wanted to clear the air. I chose to ignore her, and eventually she left without a baking tray this time. It was like she knew I wasn't going to answer. Maybe she was running out of steam. Fast forward a few days, and the pattern continued. She would knock or ring the bell, and I would simply ignore her. It seemed to be working. Each time she tried, she would eventually give up and go home. I was starting to feel confident that she would eventually get bored and move on to a new hobby. In the end, it's been a wild ride with this neighbor, but I'm learning to claim my space and my time. I just hope she finds someone else to bother soon.